Hello and welcome to episode 3 of the Cosmic Clinique podcast, and I'm Christelle, your host. And today we're going to talk about timing, change, and trusting the pace of becoming. This podcast is a space where astrology, the nervous system, and lived experience come together, especially for sensitive, intuitive, and thoughtful minds who want context rather than noise. I think we get enough noise in this world. So in today's episode, I want to explore two things with you. First, I want to talk more openly about the election chart of this podcast. I did promise that exploration in last week's podcast, but I decided to derail that and talk about something completely different, more focused about relationships and nervous system. But I want to talk about why I chose this chart, the energy behind it, the energy it carries, and why that mattered so much to me on the personal level. As second, I want to explore the new Moon Solar Eclipse in Aquarius happening on the 17th/18th of February, and what this moment is asking for us and why it can feel particularly significant if you're a fixed sign. Yeah. So if you're a Leo, a Taurus, a Scorpio, and an Aquarius, this particular eclipse is going to have an impact on you, on everybody, but on you specifically. So yeah, this isn't an episode about prediction or urgency. It's about reorientation, about really understanding timing and learning how to trust the pace at which things actually unfold. But before we begin, I like to always take a moment to just arrive. So let's take a moment to arrive. You don't need to take everything in, and you don't need to remember it all. You just need to notice what feels relevant as we go. And when I chose to launch this podcast, by the way, I wasn't looking for something dramatic or attention grabbing. Definitely I was looking for something where we could just arrive, come in, be one, be connected, be grounded, but with no pressure of, like I said, remembering everything. So let's dive in. Essentially with this chart, I was asking, how do I make this true? Yeah, how do I make this podcast true rather than how do I make this big? Now, let me explain. I knew that if this podcast was going to work, not just practically, but energetically, it had to support how my mind actually functions. Look, I'm sensitive, I'm intuitive, I'm neurodivergent. So I needed the chart, I needed this podcast to reflect the needs of who I was in order to attract also the right audience for me. And I know from experience that when I try to speak from containers that don't fit, I either overextend, overdo it, overgive, overstretch myself, or I just retract and go quiet altogether. So the election chart needed to feel like a nervous system friendly home for me and for you. And this podcast has Libra rising for that very reason. So Libra rising immediately tells us that this is a relational space, not a space of instruction or authority, but of dialogue, of speech, of sharing, of back and forth. I would love it to be that. I would love it to eventually become a space of just back and forth conversation, where, ideas aren't forced. Libra doesn't force ideas. In fact, it considers how things land. The energy of Libra is attentive to tone, to balance, and mutual respect. So when it comes down to having that relational experience, that's the energy I'm trying to embody. And that matters deeply to me because I don't want to speak at you. I want to speak with you. I want this to feel like a conversation where your intelligence and your sensitivity are assumed. They're assumed, basically, and they're not tested. So, oh, you can hear the birds chirping at my window. Well, pigeons, birds, yeah. Anyways, Libra rising also reflects something personal for me. Yeah, I've spent much of my life learning how to express myself without shrinking myself, without feeling like I wasn't good enough, without over-explaining. And this rising sign supports that balance for me by staying present without the need to perform. So even though I've got a moon in Leo and performing is a thing of mine, I need to do that in a safe container. So yeah, I think that works. That's a good energy for me. And then there's a Jupiter. I've put Jupiter on the midheaven exalted in Cancer. So this placement felt non-negotiable for me, if I'm totally honest. Jupiter here isn't about visibility for its own sake. It's about really teaching through care. Yeah. And Cancer brings that emotional intelligence, the memory and protection into the public role of the podcast. And I am a Cancer rising. So I really wanted that to shine through in this podcast. I really wanted you to have that experience of that emotional connectedness, you know? And that really also mirrors my professional life, in that I'm a trauma-informed practitioner. My work has always centered around understanding how experiences live in the body, not just in thought. And astrology and transpersonal psychology has been part of my professional portfolio for many years. And neuroscience is something I'm continually learning and integrating. And genuinely, I love where these disciplines meet. It's so interesting to me because they speak the same essence, just in different languages. And it's just like, wow. But, because essentially when you bring astrology together with trauma-informed psychology and neuroscience, something shifts. Yeah. And that people stop asking themselves like what's wrong with them, and instead they start to realize that the question is really, what happened to my nervous system and how do I work with it now? Yeah. Much more of a profound question actually than what's wrong with me, because it's never really you. It's more about what does your nervous system need and how can I accommodate it. So Jupiter in Cancer reminds me that wisdom doesn't need to be sharp to be meaningful. It can be soft, it can be paced, it can be nourishing. Exactly why I wanted Jupiter in the 10th house as well, because I needed that essence of nourishment, of softness, of pacing to be profound, to be noted, to be experienced by you as a listener. And then the moon is in Gemini in the 9th house, which gives this podcast its thinking out loud kind of quality, because in a lot of ways this can present as a bit of a diary for me that I share with you, in terms of just sharing how my mind works. I often don't think exactly what I think until I say it out loud. And clarity arrives through exploration, not necessarily declaration. So this moon allows ideas to just unfold, and it gives permission to revisit, to change your mind, to stay curious without being fixed on certain, philosophies, ideas, perspectives, just being mutable in our thinking in general. And in the 9th house, the moon being in the 9th house, it's about meaning, not rigid belief. And I don't want to give you answers to adopt. I want to invite you into inquiry, invite you to kind of like think beyond this podcast and, ponder around certain conversations, certain ideas, philosophies, principles, gnosis, and just expand your mind beyond this. But the Aquarius influence is in the 5th house, which gives this podcast permission to explore things people don't always speak about openly. And that's not to be shocking, like that's not the point here. And Aquarius does have this essence of shock and, almost like, oh my God, I'm in disbelief of what's just been said or what's just happened, or this sudden kind of like awakening of like, what just happened there? Although, that is good because it does shake consciousness, and that is necessary. But my main goal is to just to be honest, and it's this part of the chart that says it's okay to imagine alternatives, to question the norms, and to explore metaphysical or non-conventional ideas, and be playful, be thoughtful, all without dogma. And that's what I love about the 5th house energy. It just allows for conversations to have that playful kind of like creative element. And then the 6th house, we've got Saturn there, bringing structure and containment. And to be honest, I need that. And I think, in terms of being sensitive and intuitive and neurodivergent, you need that, that level of containment, because sensitivity without structure can become really overwhelming. And Saturn here keeps this space grounded, and it ensures that insight stays livable. And also we've got Neptune in the 7th house, and this placement really matters deeply to me because it speaks to empathy without being enmeshed, and having resonance without absorbing energy. So as someone who just naturally picks up emotional atmospheres, that boundary is essential. So yeah, this election chart holds me steady while I speak. That is why I chose it, and I hope that you can see the beauty in this election just by listening and finding ways to engage, to expand your mind, your perspective, and hopefully it brings you a sense of calm and connectedness and feeling seen as well. That's really, really important to me. So now this gently shifts us into the second part of today's podcast, which is the new moon solar eclipse in Aquarius. Now, eclipses are often described as dramatic turning points, fated events. But for sensitive nervous systems, they're often quieter and more disorientated. They work beneath the surface. They interrupt the patterns. And this eclipse that takes place in Aquarius, a sign concerned with the future, with identity and belonging within the collective, Aquarius asks different questions than most signs. The type of questions include the following: who am I becoming? What no longer fits, even if it once did? Where have I stayed loyal to a version of myself that's expired? And I do invite you to kind of like, these are prompts actually. I invite you to write these down, and I'm going to say them again. To just reflect and write down how you feel honestly. Who am I becoming? What no longer fits, even if it once did? And where have I stayed loyal to a version of myself that's expired? See how you feel. Notice your body. Notice your feelings. Notice how you just think and respond to these questions. Because as a new moon eclipse as well, this is a reset point, but not one that demands immediate action. So just reflect on these questions, and know that it's more that this event is more like a pause in the pattern, a subtle interruption. For the fixed signs, Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, and Scorpio, this eclipse can feel especially unsettling. Fixed signs stabilize systems, they create continuity, they value reliability. So when an eclipse touches a fixed sign, it often disrupts identity rather than events. You might feel resistant, tired, fatigued, uncertain without knowing why, and that's not a failure to work with the energy. So from a nervous system perspective, uncertainty can feel unsafe, especially for sensitive or trauma-aware systems. So pacing matters here. You don't need to make decisions during this eclipse. You don't need clarity right away. What you can do, though, is notice where you're holding on out of habit rather than truth. For Aquarius placements, this may feel like you relate to identity and authenticity. For Leo, this could relate to visibility and recognition. For Taurus, this could relate to security and worth. And for Scorpio, this could relate to control and emotional depth. But across all fixed signs, the theme is similar. Where has staying the same become more draining than changing? Now, I want to share something more specific here because I know some of you will recognize this. For a long time, I believed that if I stayed consistent, loyal, and emotionally available, things would eventually stabilize. That if I just held on, clarity would just arrive and things would just be okay. As someone sensitive and neurodivergent, that made sense to me, but basically my nervous system is wired for endurance, for adapting, for blending in, for tolerating discomfort in order to preserve connection. Astrologically, I have Saturn, Venus square dynamic, and that is very real for me. Venus wants closeness, meaning, softness. Saturn wants responsibility, restraint, and waiting. And in lived terms, this often showed up as staying longer than my body wanted to. Not because I didn't know something was off, because I definitely knew, but because I was trained to tolerate. I could love deeply and still feel constantly alert. I could care and still feel braced. And for a long time, I mistook that tension for maturity or depth. Really insane, to be honest, but also a very beautiful kind of fracture that I had to learn to heal within myself. And what I've learned over time is that my sensitivity wasn't the problem. The problem was confusing emotional commitment with nervous system safety. Now, eclipse periods, especially ones touching fixed signs, have a way of interrupting that pattern for me and for you. Not with dramatic endings, although sometimes they can be, but yeah. A lot of the time, there can be a quiet internal signal that says that this no longer fits the system I and you have now. So learning to listen to that signal without rushing to justify it or act on it has been one of the most stabilizing skills I've developed. And that's what I want to offer here. Not advice to leave or stay. Not rules about love or life, but permission to trust the information your body is already giving you. As we move through the eclipse season, I want to encourage you to be kind to your pace, especially if you're a fixed sign, especially if you like to know where you're going. You don't need to force the future into focus. Some of the most meaningful shifts actually happen before language catches up. I'll continue exploring these themes in future episodes, gently, thoughtfully, and without urgency. And before we close, I want to leave you with a question. Another question that you might want to ponder on. What might change if you allowed your future to remain undefined just a little longer while your nervous system catches up? Now, you don't need to answer this question right now. Just notice what that question brings up. Thank you for spending this time with me. You might be able to hear my son in the background. He's gentle breathing. He insisted on cuddles whilst I do this, so I didn't want to deny him that closeness. But yes, I'll meet you again soon. Take good care. Lots of love, Christelle.